lack of trust in these people. So when I talk about the people, I try to avoid using that term as much as possible. Living in South Dakota, it was impossible to avoid using the term all the time. I lived in the city of Sioux Falls. But when I'm speaking of these wonderful people, I try not to use that term. I will be talking tonight a lot about the plight of the Lakota people, and this may seem not to directly have a lot of relevance as we're talking about environmental justice this evening, but actually it's all very much connected. The Lakota understand themselves as being one with creation. To talk about one is to talk about the other. And as I talk, I think you will see that the way in which colonial culture treats one very much parallels the way in which it treats the other. And finally, as I tell my stories this evening, I want to remind you that even though I'm going to talk a lot about history and what has happened, I am also talking about change. Change to how we treat creation and change to how we treat those who live at one with creation. Ben Franklin once said, "Justice will not be served unto those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are." Now, I am sure there'll be plenty of speakers through the course of our summit this weekend who will tell you how very much we are affected by the climate crisis, and I agree with them all. But as colonial culture, we still act unaffected, or at least nominally affected. And I hope with what I have to say today and what Jehann's going to say after me and what's going to be said on Saturday, that we're able to tap into a little bit of outrage in you, because that outrage leads to justice seeking, which leads to change. And that's what's so very much needed in our world. So I want to start by teaching you a native word. This is the word washichu. It is a Kola word. It's actually not a Lakota word, but it gets used all the time by my Lakota sisters and brothers. And it is how they would refer to me, and probably how they would refer to many of you. I can't see you to know if it's all of you, but it's basically the word they use for a white person. We are washichu. However, the literal meaning of this word says a whole lot about what we will be talking about tonight. The literal meaning of washichu is the one who eats the best meat. That is how they, our Lakota brothers and sisters, see us as white people. And I think you will find out as we talk the story through tonight, it has been true over and over again. This is not something they say to be mean. This is something they say from experience. Their experience of us and how we as folks from colonial culture have interacted with them. Now, to understand Standing Rock, you also need to understand a lot of history. And that is going to start with talking about the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery, oh, I'm not going to be able to read this. I got to move my little thing. The doctrine of discovery was a papal bull that came out from Pope Nicholas V in 1452, as you see, and it was all about those who are going to other countries to discover other lands. And I just want to read you what we have on the screen. This is not the whole doctrine of discovery, but it very much centers in what the message of the doctrine of discovery was. We start in the middle. It says that invade, search out, capture, vanquish, or subdue Saracens or pagans whatsoever, and other enemies. Yeah, I still got to move this. Sorry. Other enemies of Christ, whosoever placed, and the kingdoms and dukedoms and principalities and dominions and possessions and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and apply and appropriate to himself, this is speaking of the person who's coming and claiming the land, and applied to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. So just to make sure we're understanding this is basically saying you colonial conquestors can come to other lands and you can take them over and make them yours, the land, the nature, and the people on that land. And you can enslave those people. You can treat them however you do. You can take whatever you want from that land and claim it as yours for your own profit. And the reason you can do that is because it's what Christ and the Christian church invites you to do, what it asks of you to do. It's giving holy blessing on those actions. It's really important as we talk about the Lakota and even as we talk about climate change to know that at many times through this, the church has been on the wrong side of this issue. We cannot change unless we understand how we have been wrong in this from time to time. And the doctrine of discovery is the very beginning of this. The church said it's okay to subdue people and subdue lands because it's for the greater good of the church. Doctrine of discovery is just the first piece of important history. As I said, that happened in 1492. In 1510, another proclamation of the church came out. They gave all these conquering folks a proclamation to read to the defeated Indians when they arrived on their lands. Now remember, they're showing up on these lands. They have this statement to read for them, one that was put together by a church council, the Council of Castile. But of course, they're reading this in Spanish, and not one of the native folks in any of these lands understood what they were saying in Spanish. So they're told exactly how they have to behave, and yet they're not understanding the language they're even being told. Now, why don't we do one excerpt from the Requirimiento as well. But this, remember, this is speaking to the defeated Indians. But if you do not do this and maliciously make delay in it, I certify to you, with the help of God, we shall powerfully enter into your country, and we shall make war against you in all ways and manners that we can. And we shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the church and of their highness. We shall take you and your wives and your children, and we shall make slaves of them. And we shall sell and dispose of them as their highness may command. And we shall take away your goods, and shall do to you all mischief and damage that we can, as to vassals who do not obey and refuse to receive their lord, and resist and contradict. So basically they're saying, we're going to come into this land and it is all ours. We're going to subdue it. And if any of you resist, we can do with you whatever we want. We can enslave you. We can torture you. We can hurt you. Doesn't matter, because we're doing it all with the blessing of God. So those are the big two church statements. Doctrine of discovery in 1823 becomes the law of the land, the law of the United States, when a case happens in Johnson versus McIntosh and the Supreme Court approves it. Now, here's the really important part. In 1823, it becomes the law of the land. It still is today. Nothing has overturned the doctrine of discovery as the law of the United States. Matter of fact, it was used as case precedent as recently as 15 years ago. So the Lakota people were a folk that lived off the land. They were a semi-nomadic culture. They were very big horse people, so they would ride around and they'd settle in this area for a while and settle in that area for a while, and they would live off the land. Eventually, as we started moving west, the government wanted to start creating treaties and saying, okay, we're going to have people settle out here. This is your land. This is our land. And the first of these treaties happens at a place called Fort Laramie in Wyoming, and it happens in 1851. And when this treaty happens, it lasts for a totality of 10 years. before the US government breaks the treaty. Now, here's an important question. I can't see your answers because I can't see the chat right now with my screen sharing up, but just want to ask, how many treaties with Native tribes do you think the United States government has ever kept? If your answer is not one of them, you'd be absolutely correct. To history, to this date, the United States government has never fully honored a treaty with any Native tribe. And that's knowing that the United States Constitution says that treaties after the Constitution itself are the second highest form of law. And yet we've never treated them as such when it comes to sovereign Native nations. The other piece of important history happens in 1863. There is a skirmish between some of the Santee Sioux in Minnesota and some of the local homesteaders. Because of this, the state of Minnesota asked for a major execution. 38 Lakota men were hanged. This was, to this time, the largest mass extinction in American history, and the execution order was signed by President Lincoln just 2 days after he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1868, we have the Second Fort Laramie Treaty. Not drastic changes from the first, but somewhat. And that one starts falling apart even quicker than the first one. That's because in 1874, gold was found in the Black Hills, which was part of the lands given to the Dakota, Lakota, Dakota nations. And all of a sudden, they're of value. And so the government wants those lands back. General Custer writes to Congress telling him that they've got to break the treaties, get out of the treaties so that the homesteaders can go in and get the gold. The first thing they try to do with this is in 1877. It's what's called the Sell or Starve Act. It is when the government basically asks the Lakota to sell them part of the land, and if they don't, they're not going to send them any of the support that they've been given. So if you don't sell to us, we're going to starve you out, essentially. The treaty was going to require the signatures, or at least the agreement of 3/4 of the men of the Lakota Nation, and they only received 10%. So the Lakota never agreed to the Sell or Starve Act. So 10 years later, the government tries another tack on this. It's called the Dawes Act. And this creates ownership potentials for the Lakota people. Now, in Lakota tradition, folks didn't own land. You shared the land mutually. As I said, you lived on it, you moved it around. This totally was a foreign concept to the Lakota people to actually own part of the land as something they possessed. But from the government's perspective, if they could get the Lakota people to own certain pieces of the land on the reservation, then the pieces that the Lakota didn't claim, they could sell. They would keep the most valuable pieces for themselves. It was kind of their scheme to get the valuable land from the Lakota people. And basically, they promised each Lakota family you could have 160 acres. That actually is still in place today. And it's still a concept. I mean, Lakota folks own land now. That's very much true. But the sense that there is not part of this that is shared. So as we talk about reservations, we think reservations about the tribe owns this whole land. Well, the tribe will own some of the land on there, but individual Lakota will own land on these reservations, and white folks will own land on them as well because the government sold that land to them. And the white folks normally own the most prosperous land on the reservation. In 1890, the tragedy at Wounded Knee happens. For those who don't know the story, there was a gathering at Wounded Knee, and the Lakota primarily the elderly and women and children, because many of the men were off fighting with Custer's army, or at least part of Custer's army. They were involved in a spirit dance. It spooked part of Custer's army that was nearby, and 250 to 300 Lakota were killed, gunned down by Hotchkiss guns, which were the very first automatic weapons ever created. Now, from Wounded Knee, 20 Congressional Medals of Honor were given out. And to this day, that was the most given out for any single battle. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the church weaves back in again, was the primary mover in what's known as the boarding school movement. Lakota men and some women were taken off the reservations and brought to boarding schools. The common phrase for this was "kill the Indian, save the man." They were trying to strip the culture away from people. This still has effects today. It hasn't really happened much in the last 50 years, but still has effects today. The total number of Lakota speakers right now is somewhere around 2,900, when there used to be thousands and thousands and thousands of Lakota speakers. The boarding school movement almost has taken away that language. One of the pastors I used to work with in South Dakota, he was a man named Sid Bird, a Lakota Presbyterian minister, and he would tell the story that when he went away to boarding school, the first time he was allowed to come back was about 2 years later, and when he came back to his home, he could no longer speak to his grandparents because they only knew how to speak Lakota and he only knew how to speak English. And the final piece of history I just want to unfold with you, and this one really ties very much in with Standing Rock, is the building of the Oahe Dam, which was built in the 50s and 60s. This is a dam that is in South Dakota, just north of the capital of Pierre, South Dakota, and it created Lake Oahe by flooding the lands around the lake. This is on the eastern side of both the Cheyenne River and of the Standing Rock Reservation, flooded miles and miles and miles of land, which for both of these tribes were their best farmland. So again, you have a project coming in to help provide water and such for the white people in Pierre and Sioux Falls and Yankton and even down and upriver. This major project happens and it utterly wrecks the Lakota people's land. Which is going to bring us to this important term, which is the term environmental racism. Environmental racism actually was a term first used by Ben Chavez, who in the 80s was the executive director of the United Church of Christ Commission on Racial Justice. And this is a term basically saying this is an act that affects the environment, but has the greatest impact on a certain race of people. When Ben Chavez was talking about this, he was talking about waste disposal issues, particularly hazardous waste disposal, and how that so often seemed to end up near Black and brown communities and Native communities, where we would choose to put waste disposal sites. Environmental racism is a way of life over and over and over again for the Lakota and frankly for almost all indigenous people. Their lands are the place where we perpetrate environmental acts that have effect on them disproportionately than it does to the rest of people in society. The Oahe Dam is a classic example of environmental racism. Standing Rock itself is another one, and we'll hear about a couple others as we go through the day. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of what happened in all that I've talked about. This whole kind of big territory where you see the unceded Indian territory all throughout. That is the Great Sioux Nation that was given to the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota people in the first, and it's not that different from what happened in the second Fort Laramie Treaty. The couple small, more yellow pieces where you see Pine Ridge Reservation, Rosebud Reservation, Cheyenne River Reservation, and Standing Rock Reservation, those are what remain now. All of that land that was given to the Lakota, Dakota, and Dakota has been reduced to these pieces of land. Now, I want to be clear, these are some pretty big pieces of land. If you look at either Standing Rock or the Cheyenne River Reservation, those pieces of land, both of those are about the same size as the state of Connecticut. So this isn't a small piece of land. However, the land where the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota were left with is almost always the worst, the least productive, the most damaged land of any that they had access to. It certainly was the least valuable land to the white settlers. So this here is where Standing Rock is. I'm going to show you a closer piece on this in a few minutes to give you a little bit better idea of what was happening with the pipeline. Do want to say I see that we have a question. We're gonna both of us are going to talk, and we're going to take questions after the movie. So we'll try to tackle all the questions together when we're done. So I told you that this was the worst land. This is actually me. This is in LaPlante on the Cheyenne River Reservation. I know firsthand how useless I think is the word, how difficult to work with this land it is. Here we were trying to put in an electric cable that was about 250 yards long. It took 6 or 7 of us about 5 hours a day for 5 days to be able to dig a trench a foot depth because it's so hard of clay that you just can't dig into it. It is not land where you can plant much of anything. Some parts of the land is okay for grazing for animals, but you're really not going to be able to farm this land. So the other part of this we should talk about before we get to the Standing Rock action itself is Native American spirituality. This is really where the environmental side comes in. As I said, the Lakota understand themselves as being at one with creation. There is a lack of distinction in a way that we really don't do in white culture. I mean, they just understand a full connectedness there. And they understand themselves as always learning from nature. If you listen to the stories of Lakota people, they will talk about what they have learned from the stream or the rock or they find wisdom in the way that things in nature actually exist in nature. And it guides both their lives and their spirituality. Many of their religious practices involve nature. You have the practice of smudging, which is a centering or blessing act, which uses burnt sage or burnt sweetgrass. You have sun dances, which is a form of prayer. You have praying to the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And actually, that's not the order they would do them in, so I said it wrong. I believe it would go east, south, west, and north when they're praying. Standing Rock itself tapped into one of their creation narrative prophecies, you may say, which was the prophecy of the black snake, a snake that would try to take over and ruin the land. And when you're at Standing Rock, they were always talking about standing up against the black snake and trying to keep the black snake from destroying their water. And then there was the word, and now we're going to hear this more, that was at the heart of this movement, Mni Wiconi, which, as I suspect many of you know, means water is life. That may sound like a quaint phrase for a group of activists who are trying to stand up and to speak to something, but this was not a new phrase in any way for Standing Rock and the water protectors and what happened there. There is a hymn in the Lakota hymn book from the early 1900s that's called Mni Wiconi. The fact that they understood water being life and that all life comes from water is a core spiritual religious principle. It was not something that was new for Standing Rock. But it was reflected in what happened in Standing Rock. You would have never heard the folks that were up at Standing Rock referred to themselves as protesters. That's not how they understood themselves. They weren't protesting something. They were water protectors. They were protecting the water. They were protecting creation and therefore themselves, because water is life. So let me talk a little bit about Standing Rock, and we're going to get even more into this a little later tonight. This is where you'll see a lot of these puzzle pieces that I've laid out coming together. So the first thing that I think is really important to mention about Standing Rock is that this was a movement that was started by youth. The youth were really some of the first active water protectors. There was a big walk, run, bike. I think there was a little bit of all of it by the youth in July 2016, which really kicked off much of the focus that happened at Standing Rock. There is a quote by Margaret Mead that I think might be my favorite quote of all time, and it says this: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I suspect when those youth from Standing Rock were starting what they were doing, they didn't think they were going to have the impact that happened. They didn't think they were starting this movement that would last for months. And yet their witness inspired folks around them, folks on Standing Rock, the adults on Standing Rock, and other tribes in the Sioux Nation, and frankly, other tribes all over the country, and eventually a whole bunch of allies from the church and from environmental organizations, and all of those were inspired by the work that youth had done. And I think tonight that's so important for us to hear. What you do in your witness and your attempt to make change around these issues, it does matter and it does have impact. So the issues around what was happening at Standing Rock were really three, and this map that I've put up in front of you really helps outline the first of two of them. And the first two both really have to do with issues of environmental racism. So when the Dakota Access Pipeline was first being considered, it was slated to go in an alternate route to what it eventually has done. This dashed line you see right here was the original proposal route that the Army Corps of Engineers was proposing. And in the Army's Corps of Engineers study, and as they consulted with the officials of the state of North Dakota, they were convinced not to put it there. The reason they were convinced to do, I mean, there was a complexity of reasons, but they all kind of went with the fact that this is where the river crossing in the Missouri River was going to be upriver from the capital of North Dakota, Bismarck. Who is it that lives in Bismarck? Well, it's mostly the Wiconi who are there. And these folks, including all the state leadership, were able to say, this isn't the right place to put it. So where we're going to move it, we're going to move it right down here, where it crosses right above what the state of North Dakota declares to be the top of the Standing Rock Reservation. So here we get into a couple of our issues. So one issue here is tribal sovereignty. Remember we talked about the Fort Laramie Treaty? The Fort Laramie Treaty says the Heart River here is where the Standing Rock Reservation ended. But as the government started taking back lands, they actually moved this to be the Cannonball River here. So the Lakota people still consider this to be their land. They still have ancient burial grounds there. They have a lot of artifacts which is spread across this land, but the state of South Dakota, the state of North Dakota does not recognize this as land. Of course, the crossing is also right above the top of where the Standing Rock Reservation is, and then Cheyenne River is right below it. And so all this waterway is one of their key places, both for religious activities and for where they do fishing and other ways that they still perpetuate their cultural heritage of living off the land. So tribal sovereignty was a big issue. Work camps is another big issue. When you build pipelines, you bring in a lot of workers to work in a concentrated time on a certain section. Work camps, when they are around native reservations, often result in a significant rise in issues with alcohol, drugs, and particularly sex trafficking related to what's happening on the reservation. Part of what happens is, remember, the reservations are sovereign areas. They have their own laws and police forces. If you come onto the reservation and do something and then go back off the reservation, the tribal police cannot follow you off the reservation to arrest you. So there's kind of a built-in way to get away with it. And the amount of sex trafficking, the amount of rapes that occur on the reservation are extraordinarily high. And another one of the things that the people at Standing Rock were speaking out against. And then finally, there is the environmental side that we're all here to consider. The Dakota Access Pipeline is, and I'm sure Jehann's going to correct me if I have this wrong, approximately 1,400 miles long, going from up towards the northwest of North Dakota down through North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and into Illinois to a refinery. It pumps a significant amount of oil. Actually, it's increased over time, the amount of oil that it pumps. Advocates for pipelines are going to tell you that they are one of the more safe way of oil travel. This is a matter of how you do things with statistics. All pipelines leak. Not all the leaks are super significant, but they all leak from time to time. What makes pipelines so dangerous is the amount of oil going through them. And the Dakota Access Pipeline is a significantly sized pipeline. The real issue that was being spoken to by the water areas was that little water crossing right here. Because if you have an oil leak in the water, you might be able to mitigate it some, but you cannot fix that. It is going to do damage. And since the Lakota depend on the Missouri River, Lake Oahe for their livelihood and religious practices, they had great concerns about the potential of leaks coming out of that. So I want to conclude by telling you a little bit about my time up at Standing Rock. I had a couple of trips up there working with my Lakota churches. The last one is the one that is most memorable to me. Some of us who had connection with the water protectors and folks who were at Standing Rock wanted to plan a day for clergy in the area to come up and witness. And we had a wild imagination of, we would try to get 100 clergy from the area to come and stand with the Lakota people. And when this happened, we had over 500 people, over 500 clergy and church people. They came from well across the state. I had one of my friends from Florida who was there with me. Well across the country, not across the state. And it was amazingly powerful. This is the main camp, Osheti-Sakowin. This is where the main part of what happened that day took place. This was actually a visit a few weeks earlier. This has taken place up the hill. They used to call this Facebook Hill because it was the one place where you really got good cell phone reception. So everybody would go up the hill to send their messages and be on Facebook and then go back down into the camp. But we gathered in the heart of camp this day for clergy at Standing Rock and started with a ceremony. And that ceremony was from, I was going to look this fact up, and I'm going to say it was the 7 of us. It may have been 9 of us. From churches that have stood up and said, we need to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. We need to say this was a wrong action of the church, and we no longer support the doctrine of discovery. Matter of fact, we stand in opposition to the doctrine of discovery. And we are there to say that we as church folks are going to change our ways in relation to our Native American sisters and brothers. So this picture you see is me as one of the people who spoke that day to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. We each spoke our words of repudiation, and then we took copies of it and brought it over to tribal elders, who then took the doctrine of discovery and burned it in the sacred fire. This was before we all then went through a smudging ceremony and walked down to where the barricades have been placed by the North Dakota government to kind of keep the folks at the camp to be able to get to the site where the pipeline was being built. It was a beautiful day. It was a moving day. I will also tell you what happened at Standing Rock was real. I mean, we gathered again for prayer up at by the barricade, and you could look up on the hills and see the snipers places and see the helicopters with guns on them, where the North Dakota Police Department and those they had hired would be having armed people trained on all the water protectors to make sure folks didn't get out of line. But it was a really important time. I have a couple other pictures. This was the United Church of Christ clergy and church folks that gathered there that day. And I think my last one is just me with my great friend from up there, who was born on Standing Rock, Louis Bluecoat, who was there to be, well, I was going to say he was there to be with me in witness, but I think I was there to be with him in witness and share that sacred day. So you may wonder what happened out of Standing Rock. The Obama administration actually in early December said that they were going to halt production of the Dakota Access Pipeline to until a greater survey could be done to see if it would actually cause damage. And then the Trump administration was inaugurated and came in. I believe it was on the second day in office, the Trump administration signed an executive order to restart the Dakota Access Pipeline. And it was pumping oil within 6 months after that. What happened at Standing Rock is not over. There is still cases and litigation to try to get not only the pipeline closed, but to get to say that it can't function where it is and all of that. So there's still ongoing litigation to try to resolve that. So to finish with, I wanted to kind of come back to the spiritual side and offer a prayer that kind of pulls together all of these pieces of how the care for environment and the care for Native peoples weave together. This was a prayer that was a traditional Lakota prayer translated by Chief Yellowwater. O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, whose breath gives life to all the world. Hear me. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty and make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things that you have made and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so I may understand the things that you have taught my people. Help me to remain calm and strong in the face of all that comes towards me. Let me learn the lessons that you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Help me seek pure thoughts and act with the intention of helping others. Help me find compassion without empathy overwhelming me. I seek strength, not to be greater than my brother, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so that when life fades, as the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gordon. So Jehann, would you like to continue on? And then we'll do the questions and answers after you.
Yes, thank you, Sue. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Rankin. So I'm just gonna shift the view, sorry, just a moment. Okay. What I really want to do is begin the way I intended to begin. And then there are just a few places where that's all right with you, Reverend Rankin, just to have it be a little bit reflective of what you've shared and answer a little bit to some of the things that I heard and amplify some of them. And give folks a chance now to just breathe and shift. Because I'm going to invite everyone to begin with me. I have a very different style, so bear with me. I'd like to begin with gratitude, as I tend to begin most speaking moments. And I really want to thank some of the people from the UCC in New Hampshire and Massachusetts who have shown me such support from the time of before going to Standing Rock. Being able to go 3 times from Massachusetts is an arduous journey and was taxing on especially Art Damaris, who did all of the driving there and back 3 trips to and from. And want to thank, I'm going to stick to my script if you don't mind, so we can move forward. I really want to thank God. I want to thank Jesus, because I do have a relationship, and that's another talk for another day. That's my testimony, which relates to near-death accidents, and my relationship with God is very much in alignment with the Great Spirit and with my Indigenous spiritual orientation and cultural orientations to Mother Earth. And I find those practices are beautifully intertwined. So continuing with the thanks, I'd like to thank Sue Moore from my heart. Also Anne DeRoche, Gray Fitzgerald, Art and Doreen Damaris, as I mentioned, partners in crime who sort of pushed me along and helped me in so many ways. Peg Spees, Mary Hines, Andy and Arnica Larkin, the Babson Foundation, and 2 of my editors, Robbie Lepser and Amanda Diver, and many, many more. And I had to take this time and to especially thank you, the youth leaders, and have to admit freely at this moment that it's very hard for me not seeing you. So this will be the first year presenting I cannot see the young people. So Thank you if you're at home in pajamas, whatever you're doing. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being present. I feel that we're in a very critical moment in our human history, and I deeply appreciate you listening. I tend not to introduce the film this way, but I will tonight because we're in an unprecedented moment of social, economic, political, spiritual, and cultural changes. And what I am offering is important because I myself have learned and grown, especially in the last few years. It's been already 4 years since 2016. It's unbelievable. And I sound like Trump. It's unbelievable and very incredible. But it really is a moment to, for me, acknowledge seriousness and the need for joy and play to be able to come in. So I love your lightness of presenting, Reverend Rankin. I can come across very serious, but it's that I feel deeply the anguish in my heart of the changes, and especially for young people in the context of a pandemic, and how they make sense of all these colliding cultures. It's almost like, white people are catching up quick. What did we miss? Suddenly they're here and they're talking, like that kind of a feeling. So thank you very much. And I would like to begin now with breathing. So let's all just take a really deep breath together so that wherever you are, I hope I can connect with you energetically. And let's just share the breath of life and take a nice deep breath in and out. Because you just took in a lot of information. 400 years of colonization condensed into 32 an hour, 60 minutes presentation is very tough on the system. So it's so crucial, and I like the way you did it, but let's breathe because I have a lot coming now. So thank you. And with that, I'm using notes, thank you. So, Aquane, Anipiwashte, Feskarma, Yumikasuk, Saida. Greetings and good evening. I greeted you all in Abenaki, Lakota, Gaelic, Wampanoag, and Egyptian Arabic, because these are the threads that make up who I am and from where I sit as the daughter born to an African Egyptian immigrant and a predominantly Scottish, French, English, Irish, and Native American mother through ancestry. My father's and my last name, El Bisi, changed when he came to the United States to El Bisi to quote unquote make it easier for Americans to pronounce, which is the joke of the family, because forget it. And he was one of 2 survivors of 16 children born in the very poorest village on the Nile in all of Egypt to Sudanese and Egyptian parents. The clan name, family name, translates to the family of the poor. My mother's lineage, easier to trace, from Europe through Canada down into Pecumtuck, or what is now called East Hampton, Northampton, Massachusetts. Many of her ancestors were fur traders, also some farmers moving ultimately nomadically as far west as California, some marrying into native tribes, written out of the white families due to the racism, where it was written in the margins of the family Bible that that particular individual that intermarried with someone outside the white culture had quote unquote turned savage. So I'm also the direct ancestor of Elisha Searle, who is a white captive on my mother's side, taken in Pecumtuck several months before the infamous Deerfield raid, and a raid of Pecumtuck at the base of what is now called Mount Tom. He was raised Mohawk and Ganawage until returning to search for family in Northampton. And as a young adult in his early 20s. So as you can see, I'm, quote, multiracial. I'm Black identified, Again, identity is another longer discussion for later, which we could talk at length about. But until Standing Rock, my identity always felt like a burden and more than a blessing. And the blessing of Standing Rock for me, and thanks to the profoundly healing and integrating experience that it became for me, I really can now rely on it as a strength to use in my work, in building solidarity and bringing people together from disparate backgrounds and cultures. Because often what happens is lots of people that are tremendously mixed are lost in the conversation that gets reduced to this dichotomous conversation of Black versus white, Indians versus white, like cowboys and Indians, and it's far more complex. So I really try to make space for everyone to contribute. And moving forward, it's also a place where I resonate so much my native cultural experiences of navigating two worlds, the one that we live in at home and the one superimposed upon us by the dominant or previously described as mainstream culture that is shifting now as we all face climate change together. I also greet you with a prayer like Reverend Rankin that I've been blessed and honored to carry with me since Standing Rock of Mitakoyeo Yasin. We are all related. It is a very long prayer that I usually open with, indicating that we are in relationship with the cosmos, with the air we breathe, with the water we drink, with the food that we eat. It comes from the living sources of our living Mother Earth. The prayer is a way to open a circle and to speak and share from the heart. So tonight, I offer you my good heart in hand, which I also learned from Tiokasin Ghost Horse, my Lakota friend and brother, Shante Washte Chiazape Kishto. I greet you with a good heart in hand. It's important to start thinking differently, or at least learning how to think from another perspective. Maybe it's outside of your comfort zone. And it's also a time now that demands the greatest flexibility of our minds, our spirits, and locating intelligence in our kindness rather than in knowledge and facts. To appreciate the way a tree in your front yard looks differently from your bedroom window than from the yard itself, or different when you open your heart to see the tree is living in relationship with you, and act to begin and to begin to connect directly, sitting with that tree, listening to the story it tells, because these are some of the cultural perspectives, of many of more than 500 nations who live in this country. It's also something to point out. We have to speak of Native people in the present. We are contemporary people. And I'm taking great privilege in saying we, including myself in that, because I was not born on a reservation, and that is not my singular identity, but I embrace it wholeheartedly and wholespiritedly. And the trees, and so with more than 500 nations living in this country who may share this deep reverence and spiritual connection to what literally lives and breathes and dies with us, the trees have witnessed our atrocities and our victories, and we're now witnessing theirs. And the trees themselves tell us about our pollution and desecration, and where, pardon me if I get emotional, and where it leads. When learning the truth about the history of these lands that we're standing on, pardon me, these lands that are native lands for you, maybe depending on where you're listening tonight, belonging to the Cree, the Pennacook, the Nipmuc, Abenaki, Mohawk, Iroquois, Huron, and other nations. And for me, I'm greeting you this evening from the bottom of some ledges that are home to Nipmuc, Pecumtuck, Massachusetts, Natick, Narragansett, Wampanoag, and other nations. Near to me and where I lived for over 20 years is the town of Amherst, Massachusetts, named Norwottuck prior to invasion. Many states have the town name of Amherst, named after the architect of biological weapons and germ warfare, the Lord Geoffrey Amherst, a captain for the British Army, anointed by the King of England and sanctified and celebrated as a murderer for coming up with the Indian solution, the invention of delivering disease by way of distributing smallpox through blankets. His genocide was nearly accomplished, decimating First Nations people. But as we see, the people of the First Light, the Eastern Door, the Mashpee Wampanoags are alive and thriving and well, along with all 500 nations presently today. The same people who so generously kept the Pilgrims, Puritans, and Quakers alive in the first Thanksgiving, which afterwards they deceived, broke treaties, and burnt the villages of innocent women and children to the ground. Hitler actually designed concentration camps based on the United States practices of placing Native nations into concentration camps they called reservations. So when I walk these lands in Amherst or surrounding towns like Great Falls, I think about the bloodshed and the horrific crimes against humanity that took place on this land. For some of us who are descendants of both the English or white colonizing immigrants and native inhabitants of the land, we physically embody the conflict within us, having to make sense of the incomprehensible and come toward it with love. Walking the land with love while honoring those whom the land was stolen from is necessary for the healing of the land herself and the people who inhabit the land now, which includes all of us. So you now have new tools in the context of a pandemic and the internet and the age of technology. Over the last 400 years, we've passed through many different ages, industrialization, different revolutions. This is no different. And on the one hand, it brings us such gifts. And on the other hand, it can completely dissociate us from humanity. But use those tools to learn for yourselves by reading and seeking out Indigenous accounts through their stories, oral histories, and her stories of our experiences to expand your understanding and develop better ways of relating with Mother Earth, not on Mother Earth, with her in relationship. Because I assure you, educationally, through compulsory schooling and curriculum development, you have been intentionally and indisputably lied to. And still, what's really wonderful is the work of the people who are engaged in telling the truth, like the group that Reverend Rankin was with in Standing Rock in burning the doctrine of discovery. These are symbolic and courageous acts on the part of white allies and religious institutions willing to admit the role of the church in the subjugation and the brutal genocide of Native people. The reparations economically only, pardon me, I left something. So what's wonderful is the truth has come out. It's available to everyone now, and it's healing. So seek it. Everyone has a role and a speaking part in the unfolding of the reconciliation and reparations movement and processes. The reparations economically only barely scratches the surface of what was stolen and lost forever. It also illuminates the violation of the international laws that prohibited genocide and prohibit genocide and theft of occupied lands to such an extent that if we follow through on reparations completely, it requires the establishment of a new country from a legal standpoint, okay, because these are stolen lands. So when we talk about the land as if the state of Dakota doesn't recognize it as Lakota land, it's completely, to think of it from the perspective of, it would be like someone coming and taking your house away and then saying, well, you could live in the bathroom, but you can't go into the living room because we've taken that over, but still it's your house. And that's a terrible example. But the reason people avoid conversations around reparations, which could be in the form of land tax and different monetary compensations to tribes, is because it gets into very dangerous water in the realization of how this nation state was formed on the illegal theft of lands and the genocide of the original inhabitants. So the work is very important. And even though it brings up uncomfortable conversations and truths that might be hard to cope with, I believe that the truth does lead us into a better future, even if we recreate the way we're living amongst one another. So many of you are seeing my film this evening for a second, possibly a third time, or the first time. So I want to thank you. I'm very honored that you're receiving me again. And for many of you tonight, you come back as leaders yourselves. In the last several years, you've been out on the forefront fighting for democracy, some of you fighting to protect water and land, fighting against pipelines, and you're bringing your light and your courage and your love to this planet to protect people and to tell the truth. And for that, I really thank you. Anything you're doing now is leadership. Working to save bees is critical. Anything, any aspect. The beauty of working to protect the environment is it truly is what brings us together in solidarity. So tonight, the film, it's a reflection. It's kind of like a chapter out of my diary that's now several years old. So there are many ways my thinking has changed and developed since being there. I don't want to overly romanticize Standing Rock. It was absolutely incredibly beautiful and life-changing. And it was the beginning of a series of movements of resistance in bringing people together. White, Black Lives Matters, Red Lives Matters, the whole movement together to move now forward strongly to protect one another in the land. So watching it, I hope that you can see that it's the moment now that we're sharing that is very important. And this upheaval that you're witnessing and experiencing isn't something dangerous to fear. It's the chaos and the opportunity from which stars are born. And for me, I see the young adults that have been leading actions in this area for Black Lives Matters, for protecting land, for standing in front of bulldozers in front of sacred sites to stop them from digging it up. You're the stars. You're the leaders that we've been waiting for. And just thinking about Earth from a traditional Lakota cultural perspective, for example, as Mother Earth, you might be awakened to treat Earth as a living mother figure with more respect. People can take on some of these cultural attitudes that might prevent us from littering or spitting on Earth or any number of things, putting a cigarette out. You might not do that if you conceive of the Earth as your mother. So hopefully you wish to live in the world in a way that secures it for your children and your children's children. And this change, as you know, can only come about, and this is a quote, by gaining knowledge and sharing the knowledge across cultures. Stated emphatically to me this afternoon by my adopting mother, Joan Tavares Avant from the Deer Clan, mother of the Mashpee Wampanoag Nation. And she was so excited that I was able to share with you tonight, and she sends her greetings. Actually, she's talking on another Zoom thing tonight. So I invite you to reflect on a few things while you watch the film. You know, one thing I've been wondering is how you feel about what is the silver lining of the pandemic? What has been the global pause that it created, giving you an opportunity to stop and look inside yourself, whether it's through meditation or yoga or prayer, to answer your own calls to service. What brings us together? What makes us wholly human? What common ground can we share? If white and privileged, what can I surrender to invite others to feel safe, to share their experiences, maybe to stop speaking completely and just listen? What does it mean now to serve? What are my gifts and passions I benefit others with? How can I interact with people I know nothing about? How do I stop making assumptions or start by asking more questions? And how do I best learn and take steps to find mentors who can show me the way? For me, service has evolved to mean showing up afraid, showing up not knowing, and being willing to learn. It's very difficult for me because I get emotional, as you witnessed, but I'm now sharing my unapologetic truth and acting on behalf of the truth for the ultimate and total liberation of all sentient life. Because now you, the young people, have another complication, and that is you could slip into being cyborgs. You are so intertwined with technology. So how do you navigate that? We're entering into the age of robotics and artificial intelligence. We're already there. Like I said, there's the nefarious side to it. And then it's a tool, like we have it to use this evening. So I know I've said a lot and I really appreciate it, but it's important to be okay with that. Like, you know, my phone, I'm using it and it's all messed up. So that's keeps happening, problems of technology. And the webinar doesn't really form the way that I'd like to have a conversation with all of you. So this is very one-dimensional and strange. So just know, please, that you're welcome to reach out to the conference organizers with questions. I have lots of resources and I'm always happy to share. So please, as leaders, don't undermine or undervalue your significance, your intuition. Everyone has something to contribute. If you're white, please remember you're not disappearing, you're just decolonizing. So you're freeing yourself actually from the disease of the created superiority, whiteness, and racism that has been imposed upon us. And the choices that you make each moment of every hour of every day impact the whole world. As small as what you put in your mouth and feed your body impacts the world. And please remember that this world is yours. It belongs to all of you. And reach out to the indigenous nations, maybe post-COVID, because their doors are closed right now. We're still here, and offer your good heart in hand to them. Indigenous people are contemporary. You've been inundated with images and stereotypes your whole lives about what it is to be an Indian, but these are our doctors, our teachers, our lawyers, our clergy, our artists, and our protectors. We're surviving genocide and racism, all of us together. Anger is justified and valid. Don't fear it, just embrace it, witness it, feel it, and let it go. And likewise, joy is probably the most important medicine that you can drink now, and it's always accessible. In the most trying circumstances, seek it, be it, love one another, and thank you for showing up with me tonight. Wope Latanka, Mitaku Yeo Yasin, Mni Wiconi, Mni Wiconi, Mni Wiconi. Water is life. It's not a slogan. It's really paramount that you bring this, because Standing Rock was a beginning and an awakening. And so thank you. Thank you.
So would you like Anne to show your film now, John?
You know, I took a lot of time talking, and I apologize because I know your wish was for them to see the film. And so I'm gonna let that be your choice. If it's 8:16 and I don't know what the time frame was. And it was more important for me actually to be able to speak to them, because the film, like I said, is a reflection. It could be made available for them to see. I suppose can clear that now because credits have been completed. So I'll leave that up to you, Sue. And I appreciate, I know it didn't go maybe the way we thought, but I really needed an opportunity to speak because we're in such a critical changing moment. And I really want them to know how significant it is. So I appreciate the opportunity.
I'd say we have time, so.
Okay, I'm glad.
It goes 7 to 9, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's only a 30-minute film, so
Yeah.
I think Sue froze. It's something she
Oh,
did.
okay, back again. Anne, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm glad to show it if you'd like.
Yeah, shall we just start it and then,
Sure.
so we'll do our questions and answers after it's done?
There's
Okay.
plenty of time at the end, yeah.
Okay, all right, let's do it. Go ahead, Anne. Thank you.
Yep.
My name is Jehann El Bisi, and I am a peace activist. Art Damaris is also a peace activist and a United States Army veteran.
Our young people, the youth, are standing on Highway 1806 in Standing Rock, and to protect the Mni Wiconi, the water of life.
In the fall of 2016, we responded to a call put out by Chief Arvel Looking Horse, who asked for people to go and pray with the water protectors in Standing Rock, North Dakota, who were putting their lives on the line to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline.
We're asking the religious leaders to come and support them, to stand side by side with them, because they are standing in prayer.
This is our personal offering, a love letter, a thank you letter to Standing Rock, a powerful, nonviolent resistance camp in North Dakota. It is only one journey among thousands from all over the world. Mni Wiconi, water is life. Mitakye Yasin, we are all related. During the spring of 2016, we walked together with the Nipponsan Miyahoji Buddhist nuns and monks of the New England Peace Pagoda. We walked for shared security, reimagining foreign policy that prioritizes nonviolent solutions to conflict. We also participated in a 4-day walk to stop Kinder Morgan from building a gas pipeline across the state of Massachusetts. Unknown to us at the time, a conflict was brewing on the plains of Standing Rock, North Dakota, where the Dakota Access Pipeline was under construction. The largest and most successful site of resistance for global social change in over 50 years was unfolding at Standing Rock. When I was 13 years old, my family received death threats because my mother decided to protect the water in Millis, Massachusetts, where we lived. There was a high rate of cancer, brain tumors, and leukemia relative to the population. The water was contaminated by cleaning agents from 2 local factories. In this 3-year struggle, in which my mother led the fight to protect the water, the seeds were planted in my heart that would bloom in Standing Rock nearly 35 years later. For spiritual and personal reasons, when I heard Chief Arvo Looking Horse call for people to come to Standing Rock, to stand with the water protectors, to pray with them, there was no question in my heart that we had to go. I had prayed with Chief Arvo Looking Horse in the Mohawk Forest in 1999 when he came to seal the eastern door to protect the land here, the land of the Eastern First Nations people, including the Wampanoag Nation, the people of the First Light. I knew it was time for me to go, to stand, to serve, and to pray in Lakota Sioux lands. I am my mother's daughter, and she taught me to protect the water. But first, a little history. On January 25th, 2016, the Dakota Access Pipeline Project announced that it received a preliminary permit approval to build the pipeline across 4 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Illinois. 2 days later, on January 27th, 2016, attorneys for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota began their first legal action to block the pipeline, filing charges against the United States Army Corps of Engineers, who controlled access to the Missouri River. In late July 2016, organized demonstrations began. Activists and groups from around the world came to Standing Rock to form several resistance camps, including Oceti Shakkoin Camp, now called Oceti Oyate. Standing Rock Sioux activist and founder of Sacred Stone Camp, LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, stated in an interview for Yes Magazine, "We must remember we are part of a larger story. We are still here. We are still fighting for our lives on our own land. The resistance at Standing Rock is helping us all to wake up from an historical amnesia." LaDonna remembers her great-great-grandmother, Nape Hotewin, Mary Big Moccasin, who survived the bloodiest massacre ever on North Dakota soil between the Sioux and the United States Army in the Inyan Shka, or Whitestone Massacre. In 1863, not far from Standing Rock, soldiers under the command of Brigadier General Alfred Sully murdered at least 300 to 400 Lakota Sioux. Nearly 30 years later, on the morning of December 29, 1890, the troops of the 7th Cavalry went into the camps of the Minneconjou Lakota Sioux and the Hungpapa Lakota at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. They massacred 187 people, 98 men, 65 women, and 24 children. There were 45 non-fatal injuries inflicted. The U.S. cavalry consisted of 438 troopers, 22 artillerymen with 4 cannons. It is important to understand that the Dakota Access Pipeline was originally routed to go around Bismarck, the capital of North Dakota, but the residents, predominantly white people, did not want the pipeline because of the danger it posed to their drinking water supply. The decision was made to reroute the pipeline downstream, less than a half-mile north of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. The Lakota people have a prophecy hundreds of years old. The prophecy speaks of a time when Zazeska Sape, the black snake, would try to cross their lands, and if allowed to cross the land, would mark the beginning of the end of the world as we know it. The Dakota Access Oil Pipeline is the black snake. Recently, the Dakota Access Pipeline has been granted a permit to drill and to place the oil pipeline under the Missouri River. This is devastating news, as the powerful, nonviolent resistance could be met with possible great violence by militarized police, as confrontations at the front lines are likely to take place. It is critical to understand that Standing Rock has become a major front line in ongoing struggles to stop the mining on Indigenous lands and the construction of more pipelines around the world. The lands of Indigenous people have been stolen. It is crucial to understand the violation of the treaties between all Indigenous nations and the United States government. The legacy of deception and exploitation of the Lakota people is the root of the current conflict in Standing Rock. Empire is a predator and prey relationship. Empire requires constant consumption, highly inefficient, constant intervention into other people's territories, constant violation of human rights. Native American religious freedom is not protected because the places where you pray are not protected. Winona LaDuke, Anishinaabe. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 is one of the strongest international treaties made between the Great Sioux Nation and the United States. If the treaty were to be enforced, the United States would have to stop their illegal occupation of the treaty territory and would have to move their citizens to another part of the country. Charmaine Whiteface, Lakota. Indigenous people are leading the struggle to protect the earth. Why now? Why Standing Rock? Why should everyone care? The time for transitioning from fossil fuel to sustainable energy is now. If we don't make this shift as a society, then war is the only outcome, as a desperate global scramble for shrinking resources will be inevitable. All of humanity will have to face the reality that Earth's climate is changing due to human-made carbon pollution. We must learn to live in balance and harmony, protect the Earth, share resources, and take care of one another, or else we will perish.
My name is Sam Adams. I was drafted in 1970 and I served in the infantry in Vietnam in the 101st Airborne for almost all of 1971. If there's about 200 water protectors, there's also about 200 police that show up on the line. Each and every policeman I've seen at those direct actions has been more heavily armed than I was when I was an infantryman in Vietnam.
My name is Arthur Damaris. I served in the Army Reserves from 1976 to 1991. We got Syria, we got Palestine, we got places around the world where oppression is continuing. And this is one of those places. A
lot of the veterans have been here and gone and plan to come back. We want to support the Standing Rock and the tribes as much as possible.
My first duty as a Marine is to protect the people of the United States.
The tribes have been very, very respectful from my observation. They primarily offer the police water, trying to make sure that they understand how important water is.
That's why I'm here, is, to protect the people, protect the water, protect future generations.
When I was inducted into the United States Army in 1970, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic.
And the first three words of the Constitution say, "We the people."
And I'm here because people are more important than corporations.
We're here to protect water, the basic element of life.
And I'm willing to give my life to do that.
The beauty and tenor of the camps, to witness the sunrise and sunset on Ocheti Shakoin on the Cannonball River, no pictures or words can convey the way it consoles the spirit, or show the way nature, the land, and the beauty all holds humanity in her loving arms. The images cannot express the way these reflections stay with us and continue to teach us every day after leaving. The indelible impression of the children, our future. We camped alongside two brothers from the Yankton Sioux Nation from South Dakota, Wyatt and Eli, and their extended family. I played soccer with Wyatt, but he found in art a karmic brother, a teacher, a grandpa, and most importantly, a friend, a best friend. In Standing Rock, divisive tactics used to separate people were instead dissolved. When caring adults serve to protect and be present with children, paramount in Lakota culture, they can learn and grow and develop confidence. As caregivers of the future, it is our responsibility collectively to respect and pay attention to the needs of the children, not just our own, but all children. Mitake Yasin, we are all related. There was unspeakable beauty in the camp at night, in the canopy of stars and the crisp air and snapping fires, the healing smell of sage, and hearing traditional Lakota prayer songs hundreds of years old, along with the steady drumming echoing from the main fire circle. And then, suddenly, Wyatt appeared from the darkness of the camp, his brother Eli by his side, as he cranked up his handheld radio playing the song, "Bruce, Don't Bring Me Down," with the auspicious line, "You got me shaking like a snake in the grass, don't bring me down." We witnessed children spending their days in a beautiful camp that effused love, acceptance, and inclusion. This same camp that was surrounded by armed military forces with a helicopter flying surveillance 24/7. The Lakota remind us to always consider 7 generations to come as one of the guiding principles of how to serve and make this a better world. In our service, we went to stand with the people to protect the water. We found ourselves changed forever by what we received more than what we gave in Standing Rock. I would forever long to connect with the people I only shared distant ancestors on my mother's side, Lakota, Saponi, Tuscarora, and Cree. I grew up riding horses bareback and spending long periods alone in the woods. I was different and teased and called Pocahontas in elementary school. I wanted to be blonde and blue-eyed desperately, like my peers, but I wasn't. The faces looked out at me from the pages of the book, The American Indian, a gift from my mother to feel pride rather than the shame of difference. And I vowed that I would find them one day, my relatives. I found them in the morning prayers at the fire circle in NHCUCC. I found them while placing my face to the ground at the front lines to avoid chemicals being sprayed from a low-flying plane overhead. listening to instructions from the medicine man to get on the ground, to kneel down and trust in the Great Spirit. You have to be prepared to die, he said, and know that the ancestors will always protect you. The beauty and joy in the camps was a transcendental experience for us. Teepees, cars, trucks, tents, and horses. This milieu, where the past and the present intersect in a new future determined only by our actions now. The irony of Oceti Shakouin, later named Oceti Oyate, as seen in the photographs, is what is not seen. The blood-stained earth of countless massacres in the name of empire, the militarized police forces surrounding Oceti Shakouin off in the distance, parked on the burial grounds of the ancestors who fought to save their people and their homeland. The history and memory of genocide against Indigenous people is always alive and present in the camps. The mere presence of militarized police and the ever-present threat of violence and death, along with the actual brutal acts of violence against water protectors on a daily basis, one can only ask, is this America? Walking to the front lines was terrifying. Off in the distance, armored personnel carriers and a wall of heavily armed police in riot gear with military-grade weapons were waiting for us. Having heard and seen the violence being enacted against water protectors, we knew anything could happen, and so the fear was amplified until we began to pray. Water is life! Water is life! Water is life! As we arrived with several hundred people to the front lines for the action of raising the teepee across from the ancestral burial grounds on Highway 1806, was the most powerful prayer circle I had ever experienced. At the bottom of the hill, where we circled the drum and sang the prayer songs for well over an hour, the military was advancing their presence, intending to intimidate, flying their plane, drones, and the helicopter lower and closer to unarmed peaceful protectors while we prayed together. At one point, 3 eagles circled over the prayer drum for over 10 minutes, and the crowd of protectors grew in the strength of the chants and prayers. We felt such fearless protection from the ancestors. It was for me personally as if I had reached a state that rendered the police gone. They didn't exist and could not at all threaten the peace, the beauty, and the love that transcended time and space. To me, we were the ancestors, embodied. One of the lessons of Standing Rock is, if we are to serve, we must give up some of our deeply held cultural and core values and dare to change. If we are non-Indigenous, we have to give up the delusion of cultural or racial or ethnic superiority and respect the Indigenous leaders at the forefront of this fight. While we as activists are prone to get stuck in a quagmire of identity-obsessed debates in our home communities, Lakota elders invite us to consider we are all brothers and sisters of the human family. It is time to fight together in unity for our survival. We are protectors, not protesters. Please serve with us and stand with Standing Rock. Mni Wiconi, water is life. Takye Yasin. We are all related.
Stand up with the First Nations and our people that been living here for thousands of years. Stand up. We've been fighting for our freedom since the Nina and the Pita and the Santa Maria. Stand up. Like Geronimo, Spitting Bull, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Leonard Peltier. Stand up. Now they poisoning the waters for our sons and our daughters, so we on the frontier. We one nation, one cause, one people, one tribe. Now it's us against the pipeline. Get on your feet for Standing Rock, and we'll show you how strong we could be when we unify. To all my native people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my tribal people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my native people, to all the original people, to all my indigenous people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. Stand up, 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 stand up. With the earth, we can't want it in a sweat lodge, singing our songs with grandfathers. Heat rocks all in the spot, we splash on them with a beatbox from my boy Big Jam on it. Said a prayer for the black snake killers. Playing on the front lines, say you're the realest. Stand for your people, stand for your family, stand with Standing Rock, stand for humanity. Hey.
It takes a group of people who actually care about Mother Earth, life, and water being sacred, and the land being sacred, to say, we stand up.
To all my native people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my tribal people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my native people, to all the original people, to all my indigenous people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. Stand up, 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 stand up. To all my native people, woke up and sang, we won't go quiet. To all my tribal people, don't mistake our peace as we stand and fight. To all my native people, it's the calm before the storm, and I can hear it coming. To all my tribal people, I'm ready for the battle when we ain't running. Stand up, 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 stand
So I think we are going to take a few minutes to try to answer questions before we end our evening. We would invite you to write the questions in the question and answer. You'll see Q&A down on the bottom of your Zoom link, and you can put your questions in there, and we will share them and answer them to the best as we can. There's been one that's been up for a while, and that is about how close are the Sioux to the Mandan tribe. This anonymous writer had been learning about the Mandan tribe and Lewis and Clark in school. The Mandan tribe is actually further north up the Missouri River than Standing Rock is, kind of close to central North Dakota. Many of the Mandan are on the Berthal Reservation, which is another place that we actually have several of our UCC churches on the Berthal Reservation. So hopefully that answers that question. And I will look for other questions. I see more thanks, but not questions yet. So if you're itching with a question, write it now.
I was responding to so many of them have sent such wonderful comments. So I just want to say thank you to those of you who've been doing that. And I was answering in the text chat. So but no questions yet.
Oh, this is a very good question. What do you think should be added to school curriculum regarding Native Americans?
Oh, great. I'd love to take that on and share with you also on that. With regards to curriculum, I will say that I have been fighting for Indigenous education to be included in school curriculum since 1992. And they recently passed something in Massachusetts called the Genocide Act, requiring high schools in this area anyway, and I need to do a little bit more research on it, to teach genocide, and they did not include the genocide of Native Americans in this act. I'm not sure if they've progressed or made progress with that, but with regards to school and curriculum, I basically was in a master's degree program to develop curriculum for schools for Indigenous education. I've developed resource guides for teachers. I've designed and written and developed curriculum for the University of Massachusetts, and designed and developed 3 courses to actually teach about what the particular moment of Standing Rock had to do with the larger and historical movements for social justice and change. It was kind of a 3-year process to get that accepted by the Department of African American Studies, and then COVID hit and the chair was not coming back, so that's floating. I'm available to share that curriculum with any and all schools interested, because I'm not so much of a school reformist anymore, so much as a school transformationist, because I don't think that it should be added to the curriculum. I think that it needs to be integrated within the curriculum itself, and in terms of not so much the level of celebrating heroes and holidays. We get asked a lot to present during this month and around Thanksgiving, but it is completely overlooking the fact that it isn't just about celebrating food or occasions or people in that superficial way, but really getting into decolonization. So I could go on and on. They asked a question, I could talk for hours. I'm gonna leave it there and turn it over to you.
I'm going to just tag on with one small thing with that, which isn't so much about schools, but is about curriculum in churches, because that's another important places for our learning. I have a booklet here that was produced by the United Church of Christ after we passed our repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery resolution at the 29th General Synod. This is still online and available to any of our churches. I know most of the folks that worked on this. It's a really good study book for churches that are trying to learn about the Doctrine of Discovery and why our church has repudiated it, and the work that the church needs to continue to do to be allies with our Native sisters and brothers. So I'd very much recommend this as something that our churches can do. Let's see what other questions we have here. What was the soldiers' reaction to your protest? It seems like it would have been hard to not be moved by the protest. I could take this question 2 ways. There were many veterans who came out to be a part of the water protector movement. And my experience from talking with the veterans is the veterans were very much like, this is why I went and served my country, to protect this right, so that the water protectors could stand up here and protect our water. The other way I could read this question is if you were talking about the police and the private security were there. My experience is they were much less moved. They were there to do their quote unquote jobs, often because of the sides of the crowds involved as water protectors. They felt threatened, and my experience is they were very no nonsense. I did not experience a whole lot of them being moved.
Could I add?
Please.
So yes, if the question was directed at the response of the militarized police forces, their response was violence, for the most part. There were occasions where they would come toward water protectors as if there were going to be some violent conflict, and then they would retreat back, which I was attributing to the power of prayer. There were just energetic shifts going on all the time, with one of the most violent moments during Standing Rock taking place at night in freezing, below freezing temperatures, when those police forces opened up unarmed water protectors with water cannons in freezing cold weather. I was not present in Standing Rock on that particular night. The mother of the two children that we camped next to, when we came back in October, we went in September, October, and December. And when we went back in October, I found her completely emotionally really undone. She had had her front two teeth knocked out by a Morton County Sheriff's police officer at the front lines. Her kids had to be taken out of the camps because there was a moment in October and several different moments in time where the very real threat of them coming into the camp violently was always kind of there. There are accounts of police officers accepting water and sage and offerings at the front lines. There are some moments that have been documented where I think I'm not positive about this. These were stories, so I'd have to sort of research it, where they actually quit that Morton County Police Sheriff's Department that I think were quite touched in some way. There was also police violence for us on the way home. We were stopped 4 times in 4 places in 4 states by state police and black SUV, unmarked police SUVs. They had dogs jump in my face. There were really terrifying moments after, for me leaving. I was actually more frightened on the side of the road, on the side of the highway in the state of Illinois, of the state police than I was at the front lines, probably because I was with so many people in prayer. So I'm not sure if we're interpreting your question correctly, but the amount and level of violence against water protectors is the continuation of the violence that is going on today. And it's very serious. There was a young man, I was going to open with a moment of silence to honor the family of the young man murdered in Louisiana around and about November 4th. Kwan Charles is another young 15-year-old Black kid, presumably lynched and murdered, and this is 2020. So these things are all interconnected, right? We have to have these kinds of conversations, and some of the work that you youth leaders can do is directly with police agencies, because you have power. You have power to request conversations with your local chiefs of police. You have the right to request meetings, especially in high school. They're always very willing to come in and talk to students and engage in these kinds of conversations. So please remember the agency that you have to make changes in these kinds of ways. But protesting and protecting is becoming quite dangerous. An update about Standing Rock is that some of the water protectors that were facing up to 10 years in prison, 10 years in prison. My friend Chase Iron Eyes was facing a long prison sentence and has been released. And Red Fawn, a young woman accused of discharging a firearm, not really possible with 5 armed police officers on top of you while you're face down on the ground with the hands behind your back. She fortunately has been released from prison, but was facing 4 to 10 years. So if you decide to be engaged in civil disobedience, please notice the way they're even constructing laws after Standing Rock around protecting water, and it's considered an act of terrorism to interfere, I think, with any oil pipeline going in. However, there is hope and there is change, because the governor of Michigan recently ordered Line 5 for oil to stop going through. And the same thing with the Dakota Access Pipeline is become a long legal battle now. So there's the front lines and there's the continuation of the fight in courts. And in around and about August 4th of 2020, there was a cease and desist order placed on, oh goodness, help me, the name of the oil company for Dakota Access. So
Energy Transfer Partners.
thank you, Entergy. Just blanked there, I apologize. So there are lots of powerful successes, and yet an ongoing struggle as we negotiate this shift into sustainable green energy.
So, but we did have a question about finding the Doctrine of Discovery curriculum. I sent that back in the link for that back in the Q&A. If anybody else has that question, you can email me and I will get you that link at that time. Had a little more on the question we just answered that I think we have covered. So since we are at 8:59, I think I'm going to throw things back to Sue to wrap us up and to tell us about Saturday.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I came on just in time here. So thank you, Gordon and Jehann, for tonight. It was wonderful, really fascinating.
And just one more thing, Sue, it's Jehann.
Jehann, I'm sorry, Jehann,
okay.
Jehann. So I'm going to talk quickly in case I run out of this internet connection again. But please let everybody join us on Saturday, November 21st at 9 a.m. We'll be open after 8:30, but 9 a.m. to 12. We'll have Untitled, who will speak climate crisis, and Emma from 350 will be talking about the attempt to shut down the New England coal plant right here in Bow, New Hampshire. And we have a person from Sierra Club that we will be talking about PFAS and PFOA. And we have somebody from 350 talking about storytelling and how to tell your story, just as Gordon and Jehann have told their stories this evening. And Marla Markham from Climate Disobedience Center will be wrapping up the morning on Saturday. So I hope you can all join us there. Use the same link that you did for tonight for Saturday morning session. So thank you all for attending, and thank you again, Gordon and Jehann, for giving us such wonderful talks tonight and film. So thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you all again on Saturday.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.